Welcome to Short Movie Channel. Our film starts today in one of Italy's advanced prisons, where the Prime Minister has decided to implement a new punishment system. This system involves excessive sleep for all the prisoners, aiming to reduce overcrowding in prisons due to the large number of criminals. The Prime Minister mentioned in his speech that this is the best punishment system for criminals, as after serving their sentences, they become peaceful individuals who can return to their normal lives again. At the same time, we see Dr. David, the psychologist in charge of putting prisoners to sleep, listening to the Prime Minister's speech. Afterward, he goes back to his work, where he is asked to wake up one of the prisoners to make them reflect on their crime. This is a routine procedure that happens with every prisoner every 3 months, to ensure their mental health and remind them that they are in prison. Later, David goes to talk to Valle, the prison guard and his only friend, telling him that he is starting to get exhausted from his work and that he feels he can't bear the suffering he sees in the eyes of the prisoners he wakes up every day. At the end of the day, David returns home, where he finds his girlfriend, Viola, waiting for him. On this day, Viola sees a picture of David's late wife. When she asks him about it, David refuses to answer and takes the photo from her. Viola understands his condition and doesn't get upset, especially since she knows David is still affected by his wife's death. Although David is considered one of the best psychologists in the country, he couldn't treat his wife's depression and prevent her from committing suicide. The next day, David goes to work and finds a new doctor waiting for him. His name is Andrea. They introduce themselves, and David remembers that he had seen Andrea at one of the seminars, and he was so impressed by him and the knowledge he had that he wished to be like him. David learns that Andrea will take his position, as the prison management decided to let him go. David speaks with the prison director, Dr. Felli, who apologizes for not telling him the news herself. She explains that this decision was made for his sake, as he has endured a lot of negative energy in this place, and needs some distance to rethink his life. She tells him that he has a month to train Andrea and teach him the job's secrets. After that, he will be free. The next day, David goes to work and begins to wake up the next prisoner, a woman named Anna. At first, she doesn't remember her crime and thinks she is innocent. However, David starts reminding her gradually until she recalls that she killed 2 young men while driving under the influence of alcohol. David explains to Andrea that before sending any prisoner back into the excessive sleep system, they need to select 3 pictures that will repeat in their dreams, as it helps provide them with a sense of safety in their sleep, which positively impacts their mental health. In the evening, David goes out with Viola and tells her that he won't be working in the prison anymore, and that he will have to leave the house provided by his job. Viola offers him to stay in her house temporarily until he sells his old house in another city, and he agrees. The next day, while David is on his way to the prison, he encounters a protest by a group of civilians opposing the excessive sleep system for prisoners. He ignores them and continues on his way. When he arrives at the prison, he finds a disaster waiting for him. One of the prisoners woke up ahead of schedule, and he learns that the prisoner's record is completely erased, and there's no information about him. The biggest shock is that the prisoner is fully awake, unlike any other prisoner who wakes up disoriented. David becomes concerned and decides to put him back into a coma without looking for any information about him. However, Andrea blocks his way, saying it's a crime, and they will be held accountable for it. At the same time, they hear an alarm coming from the prisoner's capsules. When David checks, he finds that Anna's capsule has been disconnected from its oxygen supply. David rushes to restore the oxygen to her just in time to save her life. Later, Valle arrives and tells David that he suspects Andrea is involved in the prisoner waking up and in the oxygen issue with Anna's capsule. At the same time, Andrea accuses him of the same charges and tells him that the evidence is his relationship with Viola, who is the wife of the deceased prisoner. During this time, there is a fight between them, and Valle threatens both of them. He then takes them to the prisoner, and that's when David is shocked to find Viola there as well. The prisoner manages to deceive Valle, taking the gun from him and shooting him dead. But that's not all. He moves closer to Viola and starts choking her. At this moment, David struggles to control himself. then rushes toward the prisoner and hits him with all his might until he kills him. At that moment, David wakes up from his sleep. Eventually, he finds out that he was sent to prison for killing that prisoner, and he was also accused of being involved in Anna's death due to oxygen deprivation. Dr. Philly is in charge of his case. Initially, David has no memory of his crime, but Dr. Philly reminds him. She then asks him to tell her about the first time he saw Viola. David tells her that the first time he saw her was in prison, where she and her son were recording a message for her husband, who was a prisoner. By the way, her husband was a famous neurologist who was accused of murdering his assistant after having a secret relationship with her. David continues, saying that from the first time he saw Viola, he was immediately attracted to her. Because of that, he was able to gather information about her and learn that she was a famous pianist. Although he didn't like music, he attended one of her concerts. Afterward, he went and talked to her, and he managed to make her like him too, inviting him to her house. From that day forward, their relationship began and lasted for 11 months before her husband was killed. During this time, Dr. Philly tells him that his sentence for his crime was 20 years of excessive sleep. However, because of his status and the many contributions he made while overseeing the project, he was released after serving half of the sentence, 10 years. That's when David discovers that he is now 55 years old. He learns from Dr. Philly that the government will provide him with a new home and job so that he can start a new life. Indeed, David goes to collect his belongings from the locker and leaves the prison. There, a police officer is waiting for him, taking him to his new house. He finds out that he is still under surveillance, and that any mistake, no matter how small, will send him back to prison. The officer also tells him that there is a mandatory weekly therapy session for all released prisoners, which he must attend, or he will be punished. David agrees to this, and on his first day out of prison, he faces a very tough day. He is afraid to sleep because he fears the disturbing dreams he had during his sentence might return. The days go by, and David begins to adapt to his new life. The government has provided him with a job at a simple hotel. However, David still experiences many hallucinations due to the excessive sleep that lasted for many years. One of these hallucinations involves seeing a strange man always pointing at his head. After finishing his work, David goes to the mandatory therapy session, where all the prisoners complain about the same symptoms, hallucinations. When the session ends, the doctors explain that the reason for the hallucinations is the brain and subconscious, which have been strengthened by excessive sleep. But with time, they will return to normal. After the session, the doctor asked David and 2 others to meet him the next day at a photo studio. When David arrived at the studio, he found out that they wanted him to talk about the benefits of the excessive sleep project, claiming that it had made him a new person. However, David initially refused because he had lived according to the system after being imprisoned, and even now, he couldn't live his life normally. But when David saw the officer who was responsible for monitoring him, he feared going back to jail. So, he agreed to talk about the benefits of the project. Later, David left and took a walk through the streets, thinking to himself when he saw a picture of Viola at one of the nightclubs. When he entered, he saw Viola playing her music, and when she noticed him, she ignored him and continued playing. After the show, she followed him outside, argued with him, and told him that she had been living in torment for 10 years because of him. People had accused her of being involved in the murder of her husband. She told him that she didn't want to see him again, and if he ever crossed her path again, she would call the police. David went back home, feeling upset. There, he was shocked to find the officer outside his room after searching the entire house. Not only that, but the officer treated him horribly, hitting him before leaving. At that moment, David noticed a picture of a fountain on the wall. He couldn't understand how that picture had ended up in his house or why it was there. The next day, while David was at work, he was surprised by a visit from his friend, Fally. David was shocked to see him because he thought Fally had died. Fally explained that he had been saved, but after that, he had retired. David then told Fally about the fountain picture he had found in his house. Fally encouraged him to visit the location of the fountain to search for any evidence that might help him. He also gave David a gun, telling him he should have it for protection in case anything happened. The next day, David went to the fountain, where he noticed the house with an iron gate behind it. When he approached the house, he saw a husband and was shocked to learn that this was her house. He went to speak with the husband, lied to him, and said he was a colleague of hers at work. The husband believed him and let him inside. He explained that she was innocent and had never killed anyone, but the government accused her of murder, imprisoned her, and even convinced her to confess to the crime. The husband told David that the government had done this because she had discovered the catastrophic flaws in the excessive sleep project and was going to destroy all their plans. While David was searching through Anna's files, he was shocked to learn that Viola was Anna's friend and had helped her with research on the project. He recalled Viola's words when she told him that one of her husband's friends had contacted her, asking to meet her to prove his innocence. At the time, she had asked David for help, but he was hesitant. David immediately went to Viola's house and told her that he had discovered important information that she needed to know. He began to tell her about the information he found from Anna's husband and revealed that her husband had been involved in the research. Viola thought about her husband's words about the research and told David that there were prisoners who had been treated by her husband after they were released from prison. She said that he had noticed the mental issues they developed after leaving prison, which led him to investigate the project in order to uncover its secrets. While they were searching through the information, Viola saw a photo of her husband's friend, who wanted to prove his innocence, with the Prime Minister. They decided that they needed to meet him and hear what he had to say about her husband's innocence. David was able to track down his location, and he threatened him with a gun, demanding that he reveal all the secrets he had hidden about the excessive sleep project. He told them that he had been involved in the project because of his closeness to the Prime Minister. After discovering the corruption and the deadly effects it has on the minds of prisoners, he wanted to stop it, but unfortunately he failed. That's why he was helping Viola's husband by passing along secret information that could expose the corruption of the project. But when the government found out he had this information, they decided they needed to get rid of him and the information he knew. When they asked David if he was innocent as well, they took his gun from him, but found it to be empty. At that moment, the officer told David that it was impossible for him to be a criminal because a criminal would remain a criminal even after being released from prison. At that moment, David walked with Viola, thinking about the information he had discovered. During this time, Viola decided to forgive him and give their relationship a second chance. When David left Viola's house, he saw the same hallucinations and the same man pointing to his head. This time, David decided to search his hat where he saw the signal. He was shocked when he found a memory chip in the hat. When he opened it, he saw a video of himself from 10 years ago when he decided to help Viola. That's why he woke her husband up illegally and started asking him about the information he knew about the excessive sleep project. He explained to him about the corruption in the project and how it causes the merging of consciousness with the unconscious, which helps the government convince any prisoner to accept false crimes they didn't commit. At that moment, David understood that he was innocent and that the government wanted to get rid of him because he had uncovered their corruption. At the same time, David saw the government's men kidnapping Viola from her house. So, he chased them in his car until they arrived at a big mansion. When David entered the mansion, he discovered that there was a big party, and among the guests was Dr. Andrea, who appeared to have completely changed and become one of the most important figures in the state. David was able to pull him away from the party and threatened him with the weapon he had until Andrea confessed that he was indeed responsible for the deaths of Anna and Viola's husband, and that from the moment he entered prison, he had been working with the Prime Minister to bring them down. They took David back to the party, and he threatened the Prime Minister to return Viola, whom they had kidnapped, or he would kill him. David told him that he had exposed all their corruption and everything they had been doing to the prisoners. But the Prime Minister insisted that the project was successful and that because of it, crime had decreased in the country, plus the prisoners were leaving with no memory of their criminal past and starting new lives. He was determined that the project would continue no matter the cost. At that moment, Viola arrived, so David aimed the gun at Dr. Andrea and the Prime Minister, almost shooting him, but Viola stopped him and asked him to leave the place as quickly as possible. Suddenly, David found the mansion empty. Then, he heard a voice calling him and asking him to wake up. When David woke up, he found himself in prison with Dr. Feely in front of him. He was confused, not understanding what had happened to him, or why he was back in prison again. He told Feely that he had finally found the proof of his innocence that was in his hat. At that moment, Dr. Feely was shocked when she told him that, in fact, he never left the prison and that he had been asleep for 35 years, and now he was 80 years old. David was stunned by what he heard and didn't understand how he had managed to find the proof of his innocence even though he was asleep. Then David saw the 3 pictures he had chosen to appear in his dreams: the picture of the fountain, the picture of Viola, and the picture of a man pointing to his head. At that moment, David realized that he had chosen those images to help him uncover the truth in his dreams. Each time they tried to convince him that he was a criminal, he was able to resist their thoughts and remember that he was innocent. After that, Feely returned David to the coma once again, but she then went to search through his belongings until she found the chip in the place he had told her about. At that moment, she was sure that David's words were true, and that he was innocent while they were all involved in a system larger than themselves. And so, this is where the events of our movie end today. I hope you enjoyed it with us. Don't forget, if you liked the video, to support us with a like and subscribe.